Shepherds of Men is a secular movement started by three men of faith. We wholeheartedly believe that when we get the men right, we get the world right. We believe this because we believe that men are created and called to be leaders, and we believe there is an alarming deficit of leadership in our world today.
And although the three of us have come from drastically different backgrounds, our core principles have given us a unified voice that is needed now more than ever to pave the way for a fundamental change in our culture.
We are quite literally calling men to something great.
Welcome to the movement.
What is up, world? This is Cam coming at you with the Movement Podcast and Shepherds of Men here with my brother JP as always. What's up, JP?
Yo.
I'm digging the very masculine background there, looking sexy.
Figured men was applicable in this situation.
Yeah, I think it's a good topic of discussion. Something that we run our jaws about quite a bit. I feel like we've learned something from ourselves at this point, right?
Yeah, sure.
So good to have everybody here, man. It's been a couple of weeks since we were actually recording. If you haven't checked out the last podcast, definitely go do that with I think it was Eric Sardina we had on the last one. Fantastic stuff there. Been working on some things that are happening on the coaching and the training side of stuff, but today we are incredibly blessed and fortunate to have Mr. Jake Kauffman in the house with us, and this is a kind of a retake because last time we kind of screwed the pooch, dropped the ball, whatever verbiage you want to use on Jake. So we owe him big time, and we're just proud to have him on here. Just getting to know Jake, but we have no doubt that this is going to be a conversation that blesses us, and in turn blesses all of you that are listening to it as well. So Jake, welcome to the Movement Podcast, brother. Glad to have you here.
Guys, thank you so much for having me, and of course, no apology needed.
Well, I appreciate you saying that, but I just blame JP. Basically, is typically what I do.
That's fair. I think it
there
was.
We go. That works
too. I
remember. Oh man. So all right. So we have crossed paths on socials, which is kind of the norm these days. You know, I feel like we start every podcast like this, like, hey, it wasn't Tinder or anything. I wasn't swiping left, but we did meet online.
Yep.
And obviously running some of the same spaces, have a lot of alignment. We've had a chance to hop on a call before and had an incredible chat with you, man, and just really appreciate what you're about. You've got a crazy story that we want to hear more about, and
definitely.
You've got a lot of stuff happening right now, from a book coming out or already came out to working full time again to all kinds of,
Yeah,
So,
it's great. I mean, the book is definitely dominating the majority of my time at this moment, which is exciting. It comes out in mid-April. To kind of answer your question, I know you didn't ask specifically, but comes out in mid-April, and so a part of working up to the release is partnering with guys like yourself, where there's a lot of alignment in terms of values and messaging with your audience. And so I'm just excited to be here and talk more about that, and obviously highlight the work that you do, because there are so many similarities between us.
For sure. Absolutely, man. So let's get into that then. Like, for those that aren't familiar with you, maybe haven't been following your content or your story or whatnot. I know we've talked about it, but just throw us the background again on kind of how you got into this space. What has transpired over the last year that, at least from my understanding, has shifted some things, to say the least, for you, and just kind of where you're headed from here with the book and everything else.
Yeah, absolutely. And thank you for asking. So, oh man, backstory as far as what sent me down the road of transformation, similar to the both of you. I grew up in a very conservative environment, conservative Christian church, and always felt on some level as if there was something missing. And of course, when I was younger, couldn't really put my finger on what exactly that was. But what I knew was that as I, grew up and ventured into my 20s, graduated college, no matter how much I prayed, no matter how much I attended church, no matter how much I read the Bible, I still found myself struggling with certain things. And the primary thing that I found myself struggling with was just a fundamental fear of connection, love, intimacy. I very much grew up in an environment where it was never okay to not be okay. Again, very strict, very conservative, fundamentalist environment, which I think a lot of, your audience will relate to on some level. And so I got to the point where I was like, I need to figure out something else. Like, not that I'm against the church per se. I think there's a lot of value in it, and it kind of has brought me to where I am today. And I agree with a lot of it, but there's just something missing that I'm not receiving, I'm not getting from the church, and so I feel like I really need to. And again, this is language that I'm using now, but didn't really have back then. I need to find other resources that I can utilize to grow and heal. And that's what ultimately had me kind of dive into the world of personal development when I was 28, 29 years old. So about 10 years ago now. And I kind of just fell down the rabbit hole because the whole concept of self-betterment, reaching my full potential was, of course, very attractive to me as a guy in, his late 20s who was still very much young, had a lot to accomplish, big goals, big dreams, huge vision. And as you can imagine, just like with any growth journey, it's never linear and it always happens in layers. And so in early 2019, so about 4 years into it, 4 years into things, I decided to share my story on social media, specifically around the sexual abuse that I experienced growing up while attending Christian summer camp. And now, throughout my personal development journey, I had gone through a lot of therapy, received a lot of coaching around the incident. So I felt like I had experienced enough healing to be able to share it from a place of perspective, right? Rather than from a place of pain, and offer value to other people who had experienced something similar, right? They say that roughly 1 in 3 women will experience some type of abuse or assault in their lifetime, 1 in 6 men. So I figured a lot of people are going to be able to benefit from hearing my story and how I've gone about healing from it, moving beyond it, and ultimately leveraging that pain and turning it into purpose. Because it's very much at the core of what I do and the work that I do with men today. So I shared that story online on social media in early 2019, so over 4 years ago now. And when I did, my nervous system collapsed. So I suffered what is referred to as an acute nervous system breakdown. The amount of connection that I experienced by way of sharing my story created way too much stimulation and input for my reticular activating system in my brain to be able to handle. And so I basically ended up having a panic attack on steroids, is the best way to describe it, and in order for people to wrap their minds around it. And as you can imagine, it was very dysregulating. I had never had a panic attack before, let alone one that was that extreme. I think stress in many ways is normalized in our society, but I had never experienced something like that before. And it had me start to experience all sorts of physical health conditions, but also mental health conditions, where I was just dissociated because of the amount of input, the amount of connection, because I had spent so long hiding, right? I had created this persona, which simply means mask in Latin, to hide from the pain, right? Which of course created this barrier or this wall that kept me on some level disconnected from people and disconnected from my true and authentic self, which is very common for all of us, right? This is a common developmental experience. When we are young, we seek to answer the questions: who do I need to be? What do I need to do? And how do I need to be perceived in order to be loved, accepted, and successful? Right? So as you can imagine, these parts of our personality are simply adaptations or overcompensations to avoid being rejected, being judged, being condemned, abandoned, whatever it may be. But those are survival strategies. They become a part of our personality but they're not who we genuinely, authentically are. They're simply who we become, right? And most of us never actually break free from those survival strategies. We continue to play them out well into adulthood. And what do we end up doing? We typically end up passing them on to our children, which is why, they say most men pass on their wounds and not their wisdom, right? Because they never actually get to the point to where they reconcile the past. What do? They just continue to repeat it and recycle it in the present. And so for myself, I needed some outlet. And so I started journaling with the encouragement of my therapist at the time to support me kind of through the dysregulation that came from, sharing my story on social media. And after a couple of months of that, I was like, I think this could be a book. And here we are 4 years later.
So literally the book is an adaptation of your journal over your time in therapy.
Yeah, it's a memoir.
Yeah. Wow. That's awesome, dude. That's awesome. And for somebody that suffered such a drastic, reaction to the attention that your story was getting, it says a lot about you to now put that on paper and put that out to the world and something that's so permanent. I love it. I mean, you essentially, I'm sitting here hearing that, and I'm like, I've heard stories of some guys that I have a lot of that I hold in high regard, and a lot of the reason is because of the way they attack life. They don't let fear control their life.
Sure.
I could tell you a story about a guy that used to be a kind of an indirect mentor of mine that he's paralyzed on one side of his body, and he was swimming in the ocean, and the tide started or not the tide, but the current started pulling him out and the undertow and everything, and he almost got sucked out, and
Wow.
he made it back in. But then after kind of getting his wits about him and kind of understanding what just happened, he went back into the ocean. And his mentality was, I'm not going to let it beat me. Because at that point, the ocean was winning. And so he went back, and so for you, and this may not be, this is what I hear from, and I appreciate you so much for sharing it and for doing the work that you've done on such a scale, because it's another example of somebody just going, I'm not letting that control my life. I'm going to go one step further just to know that I'm in control of it. So, kudos to you, man. Big time.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I mean, as you can probably imagine, because the book is, just like you mentioned, this adaptation of my journal entries. Initially, it was very much like about me, for me, in terms of like, this is an experience that I need to have as far as like getting my thoughts on paper so that I can start to work through and reconcile some of these things. But eventually over time, as I started to heal, as the pain more or less went away and things started to reconcile on my end, I was like, I think that a lot of people are going to benefit from hearing this story, because funny enough, and I should say, ironically enough, shortly after I shared, I can't even tell you the amount of DMs that I got from men and women who had suffered some type of abuse, whether it was physical, sexual, emotional, or otherwise, who had never told anybody because they didn't feel safe to share. And a lot of these people were married or had partners, and they still had never told them because they had spent years, kind of like me, suppressing and repressing that event to not have to deal with the pain and the discomfort of not just acknowledging and sitting with the fact that that happened, but then actually going about the work of healing from it, of reconciling it. And so that was when I, had the thought, the premonition, that I was like, this is so much bigger than me. And I think that people are really going to benefit from, not just hearing my story about, the health complications that I experienced as a result, but what did I do to work through it,
Right.
And heal from it to then be able to get to where I am today.
Well, I mean, as we know, God oftentimes uses those things and the people that go through those things to have a much bigger impact and something significant. And so, again, I just applaud you for for, and I'm not the most eloquent person in the world. I applaud you for, having balls enough to put it out there,
Yeah, thanks,
'cause that's
man.
the truth, and you start to understand that, hey, this is something that I went through, but that's just it. You went
Mhm.
through it, and yeah, I mean, I have no idea. Maybe you could talk on this if you want to. Maybe there's
Mhm.
still certain things that you're dealing with, but for the most part, it seems like you've overcome it and
Mhm.
had victory over it. And so now it becomes an asset to you, and not just to you, but to those that
Mhm.
you share it with. And I think this is something important for everyone to hear, especially the men that are out there, because of the role that we play. We're so quick to be like you said before, like everything's okay, nothing's wrong with me, I'm good. We just kind of suppress it
Yeah.
all. Well, you said something very, very important right towards the beginning. You said you were able to share something from a perspective instead of from a what was the
Place of pain.
place of pain? Yeah, from place of perspective instead of a place of pain. I've said that. JP said that in different ways before. Is like when you have the victory, then you share, then you start.
Mhm.
And I think to some degree, maybe there's somebody you're sharing with to get through that.
Yep.
But then when you are victorious over that situation, that circumstance, or whatever it was that had such an impact on your life,
Mhm.
now you have a tool, now you have an asset, now you have something that you can give to the world that can help them. And these
Right.
people that you're getting these DMs from that have not even shared this with their spouse
Right.
are starting to understand that, like, if I can go through some of these similar steps and do some of these same things, and I can get healing here, then that
Yep.
can become an asset for me too. And when we approach, and I'm just rambling here, but when I'm thinking about just times of my own life, and I know that there's dudes listening to this right now, maybe ladies too, that have had these valleys in their life that
Mhm.
just, like, maybe they're in one right now, and it just seems like, what what the hell is going on, like,
Mhm.
why am I going through this? How long is it going to last? What does it mean? Da 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 da. Just understand, if you can stay faithful, and if you choose to seek the victory from it, it can be one of the biggest blessings in your life, right? And even though it may not
Yeah.
feel like it right now, right?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I'm a true believer that suffering ultimately leads to salvation,
Mm.
right? That we need to be made weak at some point in time, especially when it comes to, if you're on any sort of personal development or spiritual journey, right? You have to be at some point in time led to the edge of your own private resources where your current mental faculties, abilities, etc., are just not a match for, right? Because that's when you are 100% refined, right? Because there is nothing that you can do at that point but rely on God.
Yeah.
Because it's not about conquering it, it's really just about surviving it.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like at that point, kind of like your friend in the ocean, where it's like you can't conquer the ocean, right? All you can do is really just survive it. Um, but you pointed out something really important that I definitely don't want to miss the opportunity to speak more into, which is, this notion, especially because I was incredibly guilty of it, of putting on this mask that I'm fine, I'm okay, I've got it all together, et cetera, et cetera. Because one of the profound themes of the book is how I unconsciously did that for decades, not necessarily because it was authentic, but because I was in so much pain, and that was what I needed to do to essentially cope with it and not let other people see that I was in pain.
Mhm.
Because, of course, in my mind, then that would mean I was weak, which would mean I was vulnerable. I could get taken advantage of, and I could, get hurt again. And I think this is true for all of us, but especially men, that our greatest strength is oftentimes an adaptation or an overcompensation to avoid dealing with pain.
Mm.
And that's what I was experiencing. That's what I went through after my abuse. I put on this high performer mask that said, I'm fine, I've got it all together. And so, of course, what did I do? I aimed to be successful in every area of my life. Not that there's anything inherently wrong with that, right? The conscious motivation was that I want to be successful, right? I want to achieve. I've got big goals, a big vision. The underlying unconscious motivation beneath it was an attempt to try to outrun and claim victory over my pain, which was never going to happen. And I think that that's why most men, and I know this because I coach a lot of them, they're incredibly successful, right? Whether it's success in career, as it comes to their health, relates to their health, or, in relationship, or a combination of all three. And yet there's still a part of them that feels empty. And so the egoic answer in response to that is, well, I just need to accomplish more, or I need to chase after more. But we realize very quickly that that's a trap. But we don't really have an answer as to, well, okay, if that's not the answer, well, what else do I do?
So that's really good stuff. You're down around Atlanta, right?
I am, yeah.
Okay. So I was listening to some Louis Giglio the other day, who I'm sure you're familiar with. I love his stuff. And he said something that I think is applicable here. And then I want JP, because I know JP has some perspective on this conversation. He said, we're not identified by our scars, but by Christ's scars. And when I heard it, I got chills, because it's so true and it's so powerful. But it's so common for us to play life, so to speak, from a perspective of being, or concerned about being identified by our own personal scars. That, like, we're not sharing it, we're keeping it in, we're putting it in the shadows because we're okay, and we don't want to be judged, and we don't want to be identified by that. We don't want that to be our overall identity. Is I was abused as a child.
Right.
When the truth of the matter is, our identity is not in that at all. And once we have accepted that and come to terms with that and live our life through that truth, then it's a whole different ballgame. I mean, and it becomes so powerful to have those personal scars, because of how they can be an asset, and understanding that your true identity is within your creator. So anyways, that you
I love that.
You made me think of that. So
yeah, no, I love that. And I couldn't agree more. I think the distinction and what it ultimately comes down to is all of that is true inherently, and it requires that you face those wounds.
Exactly.
Right? Because I'm not going to say that it's impossible, but it is very, very, very difficult to identify yourself by the wounds of Christ if you still haven't reconciled your wounds from the past. Right? It's very difficult to receive his love and receive his grace because you are running away from something, right? And when you're running away from something, your perspective is not on running towards something, right? It's on escaping something. So once you face and heal these wounds of the past, that's when you can really start to step into the future and identify, like you mentioned, yourself with something that is so much bigger than you, right? Something that is beyond your own personal achievements, accolades, the pursuit of power, possession, prestige, right? It no longer becomes about those things. It becomes about something that's way bigger, this divine agenda, right? The church might say, like, what's God's will, right? Not what's my will. It becomes much more about that than it does about, right, pursuing things to kind of puff up yourself, right? But it's called the Personal Salvation Project. I'm trying to remember the man who coined that phrase, but essentially the sentiment behind it was, when you finally abandon the pursuit of your own private perfection, that's when you can be fully used by God. But if you're running away from something, that can't happen. You're just going to continue to be caught in that negative loop.
Yeah, so I think it's a bit ironic that the conversation went to trauma, right off the bat. I was going to ask you about the accident that happened and stuff. Didn't know about the abuse and stuff like that you came out with back in the 2019. I had a big breakthrough personally for me, that was by some mentorship that I had in my life, and I was told trauma is either transformed or it's transmitted, right?
Correct.
I
100%.
got 4 kids. So like you talked about, you may not get the victory, but you can transform the situation from something that's negative that you bury, or whatever it may be, to something that can turn into a positive for other people. And you did just that, right? You transformed the trauma that happened so that way you don't have to live with it anymore. And I think there's a lot of and I'm being vocally self-critical here, right? So I'm
Sure.
one of those types. I am a high achiever type of individual, and a
Sure.
lot of that is because I felt like for the longest time I had something taken from me, and in order to regain that piece of me or that value, I had to achieve it in some form or fashion, whether it was business, in the gym, sports, whatever it may be. I had to be the best at everything, right? So it created this competition. But what came with that was also a level of anxiety, right? So an anxiety level that was there because I had made friends with fight or flight, right?
Yep.
So if I was actually relaxing, I couldn't relax.
Totally.
Couldn't sleep. I couldn't do all these things that I should be able to do when I'm at peace with myself, because I have a level of anxiety that's derived from my relationship with the fight or flight response. Because if I felt like I was sitting there, I was like, okay, something's wrong. Something's wrong. Now I had back in, when I was younger, so I was probably 7 or 8 years old. I had, a couple situations that happened to me that were pretty traumatic, in those situations for a young child. But it's wild to me because I've actually done research, like once I started looking into trauma and stuff, and it's newer science behind it. But they're saying that the way that your genes are expressed all the way down to your genetics can actually be altered through 2 generations. So trauma that your grandfather went through can actually affect the way that your genes are expressed. So it doesn't actually change your gene. I think it's called
epigenetics.
Yeah.
Epigenetics.
Yeah. So it's how your genes are actually expressed. And that was wild to me. That was kind of a mind-blowing concept to me. And it was one of those things where you gotta realize that there's a way to transform it. And for the longest time, I just buried it. I'm good. I'm good. Just like you were talking about. I'm tough as nails. It made me tougher, made me better, which it did, but it only did when I was willing to transform the trauma. That's when I actually gained the strength from the issues. But for the longest time, I acted like I was okay. I pretended like I was okay, and it affected my relationships.
Yep, 100%. Well, and that's why when you were still, like you mentioned, you were met with anxiety, right? Because you were running away from something, right? Like, I think we can all agree that the pursuit of success, financial accomplishment, working out, being the best at everything, competition, right? None of that is inherently wrong or bad, but why are we engaging in that? Why are we using it? And this kind of dives into like shadow psychology, if you're familiar with the psychotherapist Carl Jung, which is the unconscious motivation beneath the conscious or external behavior, right? And so if you are pushing, going, which looks like needing to be the best at everything, and right, this is not just isolated to you. This is very, very common in men. Pursuing achievement, accomplishment, success, crafting a really powerful image of themselves. It very often, in my experience, is an unconscious attempt to claim victory over or outrun their pain, which is why when they're met with anxiety, because their normal posture that they're practicing is around the avoidance of something. But when you're still, when you are relaxing, you're forced to be met with how you feel. And that's where the anxiety comes from, right? And so over time, this kind of becomes like your fuel, right? It becomes the thing that you then need to go and do things, right? And it's kind of this vicious hamster wheel. And it's not until you really start to reconcile these things from the past that you're suppressing that create this pressure cooker that you're talking about. Can you break free from it, right? And a part of you will always be driven, assertive, goal oriented, right? Again, nothing inherently wrong about that. As T.S. Eliot once said, you will return to where you once started, but you'll know it for the first time.
You know what I'm learning about you that I really like is you have a vault of a memory for the things you have read, and I like hanging out with people like that.
Thanks, man.
um,
I appreciate it.
JP, you were going to say something.
Yeah, so let's talk about the accident, right? So the accident
Mm-hmm.
is non-related, right? So you had, and I don't want to steal your story, right? But you had
Oh, you're
an
good.
early onset seizure, and then you had a fall and traumatic brain injury and stuff. That's quite the thing to recover from.
Yeah, so that it's funny that you should say that because none of that's actually in the book. Um, but of course, happy to talk about it because that in many ways has influenced the evolution of the work that I do with men over the course of the past year plus now. Um, because like I mentioned early on, in any personal development journey, it happens in levels and it happens in layers. You know, we're never really, really ready for what I would call necessary suffering, what Carl Jung refers to as necessary suffering, when we first dive into our personal development journey. It's just far too dysregulating. And what I mean by necessary suffering is this. In order to truly break out of that kind of first half of life identity, or as Richard Rohr refers to go from being like the wild man to the wise man, we kind of have to be pushed, right? It can't be of our own choosing, and up until that point in time, up until my head injury, which was a year ago, February 20th, all of the work that I had done in my life up until that point, in terms of like personal development, in terms of therapy and things like that, all of that was my own choosing. Again, nothing wrong with that. I needed to go through all of that. I think therapy is essential for everyone, quite frankly, just like health and fitness. In this case, we're just addressing your mental health. So all of those things are massively important. And all of that needed to happen to like build this foundation for me of work and resilience that ultimately prepared me for this necessary suffering experience, which was my head injury, which is where I was confronted by this hardship that I just simply could not deal with. Because after my head injury, for context, I went from being very much like you, JP, driven, assertive, motivated. I'm a serial entrepreneur. I've started many businesses over the past 10 plus years. I've worked for myself exclusively for going on 6 years now, to all of a sudden being incredibly depressed. And when you're depressed, you literally cannot access those mental resources. And if those resources have become incredibly embedded, like I don't know about you, but I was a 3-sport athlete in high school. So we're talking mental resources that have been ingrained and habituated for decades now, right? They've become very second nature, right? I don't even think about them. To all of a sudden not being able to access them, you're going to have a crisis of identity. And that's exactly what happened to me. Is I was like, okay, where is my motivation? Where is my assertiveness, my determination my work ethic that I have relied upon for decades now to be successful in business, in work, in life in general, it's not here anymore. Now, what do I do? Now, how do I show up? Who am I without those things? And it's a special kind of hell, to be honest with you, because you kind of have to learn how to relive your life. It's almost like learning how to walk again. You don't really know how to show up because who you have become up until that point has to change in order to navigate these circumstances. And like I said to you guys earlier, it's not really at that point about like conquering anything. It's just about surviving it, like getting through it. You know, if you could conquer it, if you could overcome it per se, that would kind of just, you know, feed your ego that is dying in that moment, right? As a result of this necessary suffering. And this is beautifully laid out in the book called Falling Upward by Richard Rohr, if you're familiar with the book. It's absolutely an essential read for, I think, every person, but especially for men, because most men just they get stuck in that phase of life where it's about pushing, improving, and overcompensating. And again, so much of it is unconscious. They don't realize that they're doing it. They consciously justify it as being goal oriented, growth minded, et cetera, et cetera. But like we kind of acknowledged with you, JP, and your story, me with my story, it's really just this unconscious attempt to avoid this pain, right? That has become like the driver, the fuel behind our assertiveness, behind our drive and our motivation. And this is true for most men, because like I mentioned, in the beginning of our lives, it's all about, okay, what do I need to do in order to be loved, accepted, and successful, right? Which is really just to say, what do I need to do in order to avoid being rejected, being a failure, right? And so it becomes this overcompensation, right? These mental resources, until we have reconciled them and reintegrate, cross over from being like this wild man to a wise man, return to where we once began and know it for the first time. Now it's not about pushing, proving, posturing, overcompensating, right? It's about contributing. You know, I recently had a client that told me the first $1 million I made was to prove my dad wrong. And he didn't realize it. He said, the next million that I'm going to make is going to be to give back to other people and to provide for those in need, right? So his assertiveness, his drive, his motivation will still be there, right? But it will serve a completely different purpose.
It kind of goes back to what you were saying. And initially, he's running from something. Now he's running towards something.
Now he's running towards something.
Yeah. And it's a whole different mindset.
Correct. But our ego likes to hide the reality from us because that's how it maintains the status quo, right? Which is the ultimate goal of the ego, right? To keep us stuck in our comfort zone, right? And so it wasn't until we started to kind of dig beneath the surface, because he was struggling with something that JP spoke into, which is, okay, I'm really successful on paper. Why do I feel so much anxiety?
Mm-hmm.
Right? Like my health is good, finances are great. Why do I feel like not only like empty and unfulfilled on some level, but why do I feel anxious on top of it? Like this doesn't make sense. And this is where I think a lot of men are. They're just afraid to admit it, right? They're afraid to acknowledge and admit and show their weakness, when in reality, like weakness is the way.
So we run into this a lot. And I think it probably happens to a lot of people that are in the men's coaching space or in anything that we're doing as far as, promoting masculinity. And, you ultimately you get that other side of things. They're like, oh, you are just over there beating your chest, a bunch of macho, blah, 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 BS. And it's like, Oh, actually, you're completely missing it. That's not what we're about at all. Yes,
Sure.
there is an incredibly necessary place for true masculinity, but true
Yep.
masculinity is not making it out to be. You know, the
Totally.
toxic definition that you have given masculinity is not at all what we're about.
Yeah.
Yes, I believe there's times where we need to be tough and we need to lead and we need to be stoic at times. We need to, all these
Yeah.
things. But there's also plenty of times we were doing a training for our guys this morning, and I'm on there getting emotional. Now JP, it's an ongoing joke. I'm the crier of the two of us, but like, dude, stuff hits my heart, like it comes out, and it's hard to hold it in. And I think we have, I don't know. To be honest with you, I'm a little confused by the society we live in now. I don't know what's cool and not cool, but as far as the way I grew up, there was certainly a sense of dudes don't cry, guys don't
Sure.
cry, men don't cry, whatever. And my dad's that way, and I love my dad. My dad's one of my heroes, but he's one of those guys that just does not let his emotions out. And I think to some degree that there's a time and a place for that, for sure. Where if my wife or my kids or whatever are looking to me for strength in a certain situation, I need to make sure that they can see that clearly. But they also need to know that I'm not without emotion and without
Totally.
feeling, and that that things don't bother me. I think probably is what would be more beneficial to them is for them to see the things that do hit me deeply, and then to see how I handle them.
Powerful powerlessness.
Yes, I like that. Powerful, power. I can't even say it, but it sounds awesome when you say it.
It's a paradox, right?
Yes.
It's a paradox. It's actually what Jesus displayed before he was crucified when he said, may this cup pass from me.
Mm-hmm.
We just talked
right.
about that. That's crazy.
We really just talked
literally
about
just talked about that yesterday.
Powerful powerlessness. He was showing strength through the admission of his weakness, because he was essentially saying, like, I'm scared. I don't want to be brutally crucified. This sounds terrible. If there's any other way that we could go about this whole salvation thing, like, that'd be great, right? But in that, he showed his strength.
Yeah.
And so I agree with you. Like, are there times where we need to, like, not allow our emotions to kind of run the show, absolutely, for the sake of establishing safety or providing for the family or whatever it may be? Yes, of course. But the problem is that if that becomes like your default setting, right, and you're not clearing or transmuting these emotions, right, sadness, frustration, anger, right, then of course, what do? You just suppress and repress it, and that gets stored in your body and in your nervous system. And that's when you start to, like, get in arguments. Maybe it's with your spouse, maybe it's when you discipline your children, and all of a sudden it comes out and you're like, whoa, where did that come from? And you're like, well, it's because you've been bottling it up, and that's been creating this pressure cooker, right, that you then need to maintain through a variety of coping mechanisms. Of course, it's very easy to demonize, like, alcohol, drugs, and pornography, but it's the noble coping mechanisms that we really need to look out for, like, health and fitness, right? Because there are absolutely people who, use that to avoid, even caretaking. If I'm constantly taking care of others and providing for others, what am I not focused on as a result? I'm not focused on me. And by virtue, I'm allowed to kind of avoid how I actually feel and what's truly going on inside of me, right? Because I'm so afraid of being with myself because of what I may feel if I am.
That's it. That's ultimately it, is making yourself busy, regardless of what the thing
100%.
is. Busy is you're distracting yourself from the thing that you don't want to come face to face with.
Yeah. Work is another great example. Work can absolutely be an avoidance strategy for sure.
100%.
Right? And then of course we consciously justify it behind the guise of, like, providing for the family, right? Being success driven, right? Having all these, like, financial goals, whatever they may be. So very easy to justify, right, to ourselves and to other people. And that's where it kind of gets really dangerous, because we don't really know what's the shadow egoic motivation that's really driving the ship here.
it's so prevalent in dudes. I mean, it's in myself. I mean, when I was younger, I distracted myself with drugs and alcohol and sex and those kinds of things. As I got older, I distracted myself with achievement, with work, with, staying busy doing something all the time. And, and it's literally because one of the most uncomfortable places for a man to be is with himself, like you just said, like that quiet time where you can not only think, but you can also as a Christian man, I can start to hear the voice of my creator. And maybe that's identifying things or guiding me to do things that I don't want to do and I don't want to come to terms with. And I don't, and so that stuff is, I don't know if it's scary, but it's uncomfortable for sure. And it's just easier for me to just stay busy. It's easier for me to like you said, it's not inherently bad. So it's like we can convince ourselves that, well, it's not a bad thing. I mean, I'm at the gym, I'm getting healthy, or it's not a bad thing. I'm only having a couple of drinks and I'm socializing and I'm networking, or, it's not a bad thing because I'm working my tail off and we're hitting this next level or whatever. It's like, yeah, bro, just because it's not bad doesn't mean it's good. Right. That's the difference.
Right. Conscious justification, unconscious motivation. I've been coaching men for almost 6 years now, and it never fails time and time again. The hardest homework that I ever give them is spending an hour in silence alone. And I think that's why, I think that's why they say all of man's problems stem from his inability to sit in silence in a room alone.
So true, man. It's so true. I think some people get shocked when we're talking. I know I did when I was first learning this stuff. Was, you get surprised by the simplicity and the practicality of the things that are necessary for us to grow as men. And you go like, that can't be it, or whatever we have convinced ourselves of. There's got to be some way I can work myself into being a better man, as opposed to remove myself. Remove things and really simplify my life and my day to allow me to then become who I need to be, not just for myself, but for those that I lead too. So,
well, and it's interesting, as kids, it's kind of important that happens, that we build this really solid ego structure, right? So JP, I'm not sure if you have any boys, but it's kind of important that they win, right? So that they can develop confidence and belief in themselves, and that like, I can do it, right? So that they build this solid identity, this solid ego structure. But as men, as we grow up and we grow older, we're ultimately meant to kind of break free from that, right? Where it no longer becomes about us winning or conquering or proving, right? Whether it's to ourselves or somebody else, it's all about giving to other people, right? And understanding, really being initiated, right? Life is not about me. I am not that important. I am not in control.
JP does a great job of talking about this concept. I know he's already thinking about it, is going from dependent to independent to interdependent. And when you get into that true interdependence realm, it becomes about everybody else. Like, how can I serve? How can I give back?
Correct. Another way to describe that is construction, deconstruction, reconstruction.
Nice.
Those are the three phases in personal development or spiritual maturity, right? It's just that for most of us, especially men, I say this like metaphorically, but I also say this like I'm laughing because it was true for me, where it's like we kind of need a smack upside the head in order to wake up to this reality. And of course, like for me, that was kind of literally what happened. Like I had a seizure, I fell, I split my head wide open, had a traumatic brain injury. We kind of have to be shoved, pushed, hit upside the head to really wake up to this reality that like, oh, life's not about me, and step into interdependence, which is, the archetype of the wise man, where he's like all about giving back and providing for others and guiding and leading others, rather than like his own personal accomplishments or achievements.
Yeah, and it reminds me a lot of the Dunning-Kruger effect when you start talking about the levels of competency as well, and that valley of despair, right? When you become aware like you
Yep.
said, I mean, yeah, you need that
Yep.
ignorance of I'm the man, kind of thing. And
Mhm.
then when you start to dig in, the more you dig in, the more you realize you don't know.
I don't know
Or,
anything.
yeah, the more
I might be,
irrelevant you
I'm a
are on your
dumbass.
own, and you need other people, and it's more of a community thing and the ability to give back and serve. But that changes everything, right? And the sad part about it is when you hit that valley of despair, when there's a conscious incompetence about you, and you
Yep.
start to realize that you're actually a very incompetent creature. Most people turn away from that, right? Now, most people are like, oh, this is
Mhm.
too uncomfortable. I don't want to do this, instead of continuing on the curve and actually
Yeah.
getting to where their unconscious competence level. I mean, you're not going to do that in everything in life, but the coolest part about it, and for me, the big part is peace, right? Like that's the big
Yeah.
part. Like, are you truly at peace with who you are?
Mhm.
Somebody that's at peace, right? They walk into a room and instead of, going, hey, look at me, it's, hey, look at you. Like your first
Mhm.
thought is, how can I serve the room? Like who's in here that, needs help or whatever it may be. And I imagine that's probably what pulled you into the coaching world is starting to have that level of enlightenment in yourself to go, okay, wait a minute, like there's more out there, right? And I need to share,
Totally.
all the stuff that I've learned with other men, stuff. So very, very cool how that all comes full
Yeah.
circle.
Absolutely. I always say that my favorite thing in the world, is seeing my clients win.
Mm,
Like in
yes.
terms of the work that I do. It's
Yeah.
never about how many clients I serve or how much money I make or anything like that. It's like seeing my clients win makes me light up.
Yeah. 100%. It's like with your kids too. I mean, like, you know,
Totally.
and a simplistic example, but like playing sports were fun and I love winning. But when I see my kids win, like I
Yeah.
used to get that, but then you realize, like, I remember when I was younger, my dad was a water skier. And then
Mhm.
I started slalom skiing I started skiing at 5, started slalom skiing at 9. I remember distinctly, he just stopped skiing.
Mhm.
And I, for a while there, I wondered, like, why does he not enjoy it anymore? And it had nothing to do with not enjoying it anymore. Is that he found more enjoyment out of helping me learn and watching me ski and driving the boat. That meant way more to him than him doing it himself. And it's kind of it's a microcosm of everything we're talking about right now. And now I see it. I'm like, I'm far less interested in playing the sport or doing the thing than I am seeing my kid do the thing well, or a client do the thing well. I get so fired up, you know. Oh well, I mean, we had a great friend of ours recently that found salvation, and I was jacked,
Awesome.
man. I was just so pumped, and he called me afterwards, and he was like, "Hey, listen, I know why I'm excited, right?" He said, "But why are you so excited?" I was
Sure.
like, "Bro, are you kidding me?" I was like,
Yeah.
"Because to be boys forever,
Yeah.
like this is like the greatest victory you could ever have." And
Mhm.
literally all you had to do was ask for it, and to see that, like, it brings me so much joy, so yeah, there's so many ways that you could look at that, but
It's awesome.
this conversation is amazing, and I'm loving it. It's going to be such a huge blessing to everybody that listens to it. I'm so grateful for you being who you are and taking the steps you've taken to continue to grow your platform, that God has given you, right? I mean, I
Yeah.
believe, no doubt, God has given a message to you, and allowed you to experience things in your life that will allow that message to come across the way that it does, and from a place of authenticity, like you mentioned. So, in that vein, tell us
Yeah.
the name of the book. You may have mentioned it already. I apologize, but the name of the book again, when it's coming out, and then also to
Yeah.
you do some coaching and some retreats and stuff like that. So maybe give us a little glimpse of that.
Yeah, I do. I've been hosting men's retreats for years now, which is probably one of the most favorite things that I do, primarily in terms of what the guys get out of it, what they take away from the experiences. But with regard to the book specifically, the title of the book is called Let Love In, The Pain Stops When the Truth Starts. And it comes out April 10th. So of course I'll be, happy to share with you guys the link for the book. It is not available for sale yet. The pre-sale will probably happen here in the next week or so. So of course we'll be able to share that with you. Maybe you can add it to the show notes. But if anyone listening wants to engage with me, follow, my Instagram handle is I am Jake Kauffman. So maybe we can throw that out there for people to engage with my content. But yeah, follow along for updates. I do 2 retreats a year for men to be a part of, where we go out in nature and we spend 5 days together, going deep, really investing in our personal development, and engaging with nature, because in nature we're not in control, right? And nature knows no kings, and so in many ways it's the humbling that we need every so often to be reminded of the fact that life is hard. Life is not about me. I'm not that important. I'm not in control. And someday I'm going to die. And I think nature is the best place where we're reminded of that.
I love it. JP, you got anything else before we wrap up here?
No, that was great. Jake, appreciate your time. I know that's one of the most precious commodities that we have.
Yeah, of course, Jens. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, man, there's tons of knowledge you dropped in there, tons of insight and stuff. We'll go back through here and listen to this again. I know I took 2 pages of notes, and there's several things that I'm going to go research and take a look at, including the book you said was Falling Upwards, right?
Falling Upward, yeah.
Okay, I'm going to go check that out as well. Thanks for your time. I appreciate it.
Of course, guys. Thank you so much.
Real quick before we hop here, a couple things we do, and we get commitments. We like pre-recorded commitments. So if there's ever any, if somebody says, no, I didn't say that, we're like, yeah, you did. We do some high carbon experiences from time to time, a couple times a year ourselves.
Cool.
Depending on the vibe and the kind of the personality of that each event, we'll ask people to come in, and they are typically in Middle Tennessee somewhere, so not far from you at all. So we would love to have you a part of that at some point. So just go ahead and throw a "Okay, I'm in" out there verbally, so we can take note of that.
Oh, hell yeah, I'm in.
Nice. And definitely looking forward to the book, man. We'll make sure we put all the stuff in the show notes. And guys, if you're listening here, go follow Jake. His content is amazing. His book is going to be amazing, I have no doubt. And you will be blessed by what he's doing. So appreciate you again, brother. And as for the rest of you, you have been a part of the movement.